My big thing that I've realised from quite an early stage actually was how you separate the hands, how you teach those skills. And the bow was always, you can't ignore it. It's got to work.
How do you get a student excited to play the bass? What does it mean to go slow now so that you can go twice as fast later? And why is learning like a spiral? We dig into these topics and much more today with Caroline Emery. Hi, I'm Jason Heath, and this is Contrabass Conversations, your show covering life on the low end of the spectrum. Our guest today is none other than Caroline Emery. I'm so glad to have her on the show. And Caroline is a professor at the Royal College of Music and teaches at the Yehudi Menuhin School. She's also the author of Bass is Best, which I've had in my library for decades. And she just came out with a new book called Bow Works. The list of famous bass players that have studied with Caroline is amazing. Far too long for me to get into completely here, but Timothy Gibbs, who plays in the Philharmonia Orchestra of London. Philip Nelson is a student of Caroline's. He was one of the youngest, if not the youngest, participant in the finals of the solo competition for the 2017 International Society of Bassists competition. And she has two former students in the London Symphony, one in the Concertgebouw, and other orchestras across the globe. I'm super excited to have Caroline on the show. So great to have her here. And we've got some great sponsors for this episode. We have Upton Bass, A440, and the Bass Violin Shop. And we'll start off today with an excerpt from the 30th anniversary concert of the Bass Club, which Caroline founded. This piece was written in 2016 and performed by 15-year-old Will Durden and 17-year-old Keaton Curtis.
I like this fun play on the titles. Bass is best.
Yeah.
Kind of to get at the violins. Hey, the bass is cool, you know. I was 26 when that got published, and then it was published on the 8th of August, which is funny because that's tomorrow. And it's actually my father's birthday too. So it 8th of the 8th, 88 when it came out. And he was born 1928 on the 8th hour of the 8th month. So that was weird. And then I went to Los Angeles. That was my first trip to America in 1988 for the convention it was in UCLA. And then basically I remember sitting there thinking, this is so amazing. It's just awesome. Then we had the it was planned that we should have a big convention in Mittenwald in Germany. In 91, I think it was. And then there was New York in 90, and I thought, I've got to go to New York. I've got to do that. And then I'm thinking, oh my God, we're supposed to be perhaps thinking about having a daughter or a baby. So I thought, right, okay, that's when my idea was better get on with it. So my daughter was born in 89. Somehow it all worked beautifully. And then we had New York in 90, and I took 10 mini bass students to New York with my husband and a couple of other teachers and a couple of parents, which was insane, with 10 instruments and a 10-month-old baby at the same time. And then 91 was Mittenwald, and somewhere along there was the Bass is Best was conceived as well. I can't quite remember the date when that came out, but it was certainly early on, maybe 93 or something like that. So I might have hit 30 by then. But I also became fairly obsessed since the Mittenwald thing about trying to do more for ensembles and chamber music, because I was running the young bassist thing in Mittenwald, and we had 12 or 14 young bassists there. One from America, mostly from England, and one German. That was it. That was cool. Meanwhile, we'd started Bass Club in 1987, so a lot was happening at that time. I think I must have been nuts or something. So that's what happened. And then basically I've just been doing my thing. I got appointed to the Yehudi Menuhin School, 91, I think. It was just after Mittenwald. So I was pretty busy with creating that class there. Now, the Yehudi Menuhin School is a specialist school for string players, founded by Lord Menuhin. And I had one bass player come, and it wasn't designed that he should be alone, but it just worked out that way. And that was Timothy Gibbs, who's now principal player of the Philharmonia Orchestra. He's been in the London Philharmonic, but he's now in the Philharmonia. And he's one of the two principals there. That was busy at that time. And then I got appointed to be a professor at the Royal College of Music. So I've done 21 years doing that. I'm 31 years in the junior department of the Royal College of Music. So yeah, I was a bit busy.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow. And it's so cool to me that at such a young age you put out these books, and it's so cool now putting out Beaux Works. I'd love to, can you just talk through like why this book, why now, and what's your hope with this?
Okay, well, Beaux Works, it became quite clear, I think fairly soon after I'd written the material for Bass's Best 2, that this was all working. It was certainly more fun than playing Simandl or other sort of repertoire that was available for young bassists. I'm a bit of a junkie when it comes to trying to get as much repertoire as possible available for students. So I've looked at many books, used the progressive repertoire from George Vance, God bless him. He and I were working parallel across 2 continents, although he was senior to me, which was always interesting to see how that worked, that dynamic. And then we worked together in Washington with Francois, I think about 6 years before he died. And then, of course, Francois Rabath is so close to us in London. So I started, collaborating with him and met Paul Ellison. And I've always had a very fond feeling for attending ISB. And I'm ashamed to say that there's myself and Leon Bosch that we go regularly and nobody else does. And it's just, I've always had my students go there, and the competitions are quite interesting. And it's not, I say they're quite interesting. What I mean is it takes a lot to get there, but it's a real nice focus for their work. But it's a logistic nightmare to get kids out of school, and we have exam period at that time in England. We have slightly different educational weeks and terms and stuff to America. But it's always been, and for me it's fine because everybody's taking exams that week. So if there's any week that's best to be away, it's that week. So it's kind of cool. And the week before is always a midterm break for us. So you can usually get the travelling done beforehand. So I've always had a really fond feeling for that convention. I like the community aspect of it. And I'm ashamed to say that we don't really have that in England. Everybody's doing their own thing in their own little cliques, which is a bit of a shame. I've tried to do something about that with running my own bass club, but it's bigger now, but it's still trying to get teachers to come in unless I've taught them before or they've been on the course as alumni students. It's very hard to reach out because people are extremely conservative in England, But anyway, so the Bass Works came about, and it was really because I felt everybody was trying to rush. We have exam systems in England which tend to buy into that sort of feeling of rushing. And I just wanted to strip it apart and really design something that was incredibly progressive, thoughtful, and clearly laid out. I spent some time in Sweden 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and I actually wrote down, I did a huge mind map of all the things I wanted to achieve, which was it was very interesting to look back on it just a few days ago and think, yeah, tick, 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 tick. And, to actually get into that sort of project of thinking, okay, what is it that's annoying me about this? Let's fix it. For example, we're as we've talked about in our previous chat, we're very freelance nature in England. So we've got the gun to our head all the time. You get it right or you get fired. And people move on very quickly. And parents feel very involved, of course, with their children's music lessons, and they can put a lot of pressures, particularly on the young teacher. I mean, I'm now of a stature that I can, reflect for them that actually, I think you've got to trust me. Don't try and tell me how to teach. But if you have a teacher in their 20s, and the parents want an exam, something to show for what they've been doing for 2 years, that's kind of hard to deal with because you have all those pressures, and that automatically gets into how you end up teaching, which is, it's cart before horse. It's ridiculous. So that was one of the aims, to sort of try and support educating the parents into, I think I even put it on my map as dissolving parent power, which is like, very confrontational to say, but I think just to support them in understanding what you're trying to do. I mean, only the other day I happened to be actually going to meet my daughter, who's playing a gig not far from here. I'm in the wilds of Norfolk countryside in idyllic August free time, but she was playing this gig, and there were 7 past students from the Yehudi Menuhin school also playing, including one that I hadn't seen who's now conducting, and it was great fun to go and have tea there. And then literally I'd been in the church for 5 minutes, and this parent comes up with a kid in tow and says, "Oh, we wrote to you 2 years ago. My son's still desperate to play the bass. What are we going to do about it?" And I'm thinking, oh my God, it takes them an hour to drive to get out of Norfolk, 3 hours to London. There's nobody up here to teach him. What are we going to do about it? And they'd also been pouncing on my daughter as well. So it's kind of, parents, of course, if they really find that their child wants to play the bass, they're going to be involved. They've got to get around, with the bass and stuff. So one has to sort of support that in a manageable way, get it on the supportive side, not the interfering side when it comes to how they learn and so on. So it was many things. It was trying to sort of sort out some of the technical things. The whole issue of the bow, oh my God. The reason why, I mean, you get the idea. I like Bass is Best. It's kind of fun title. The Bow Works for double bass. It's got a sort of hidden title of Bow Works for the double bass, progressive technique for the double bass. So my big thing that I've realised from quite an early stage actually was how you separate the hands, how you teach those skills. And the bow was always, you can't ignore it. It's got to work, which is why the bow works is so important. My kids always laugh when I'm sort of emphasizing the message here, but it's so crucial. Why is this so complicated on the bass? Well, we play a large damned instrument, don't we? The movements are very much more complex in terms of, I think you can get away with more on the violin or the cello. I mean, I'm sure I could probably say that on a bass channel, but the violinists won't kill me for saying it. But I do actually think that's a big issue, a literally big issue. And the whole posture of how you teach young students, I mean, it drives me nuts when people start saying, "Ooh, I have to teach standing up because there isn't a stool there." I'm thinking, no, cart before the horse. If you're going to do it properly. Either teach standing up, in which case, I mean, personally, I'm sure people teach standing up in whatever way they choose and very successfully. If I'm going to teach standing up, I've done it with 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds. I'm quite cool about it, but you have to have a lot of support for that. If you're teaching in schools, maybe it's better and safer to sit down. It's one less thing to worry about. I love standing my students up once they can play a little bit, and quite advanced, and I'm quite into the Rabath M-pin angled approach and so on. And this is another time when you can reinforce the bow because they've got this balance thing to sort out.
Next up, we dig into that concept of going slow now to go twice as fast later. I love this concept. As soon as I chatted about this with Caroline, I started to use it in my lessons, and it's just a beautiful thing to wrap your brain around. Before we dive into that, I'd like to give a shout out to Upton Bass. So glad to have them on board with the podcast. And I want to let you know about their Concord model, which is basically a Prescott. They took several GABA-shaped Prescotts and copied them from the upper corners down. But Upton knew that if the Prescott shape was to be viable today, the ergonomics needed to be dealt with, the really big basses. So Upton incorporated some elements of the car model into that classic Prescott form. It takes all of your attention when they're building it, the Upton folks tell me. And so it's only available as a completely solid wood bass. And they copied Scott LaFaro's Prescott F-holes on the model, but kept them on-cut to pay homage to Prescott. Check them out online at uptonbass.com, and thanks for sponsoring the show. I'd also like to give a shout out to the A440 Violin Shop. Brings back memories of my couple decades in Chicago. I can't even begin to tell you how many times I took my own bass to A440 to get some work done, or I told a student, you got to check out A440. You got to check out the instruments they have, the bows they have, the quality work they do. I've been a fan for a long time. If you are in the Midwest or passing through Chicago, do yourself a favor, stop by A440, just west of Wrigley Field on Roscoe, in beautiful Roscoe Village. Check them out online at A440violinshop.com. There's one phrase in this article that you sent me, and I love it, and you hit on it, but maybe we could dig into this. It's this: go slow enough in the first few months, and then you go twice as fast later on. I love that line. Can you just talk about like how can you maybe elaborate on that? Because I think that's such a key concept, and it's something that I struggle with when I'm teaching young people. It's like, I want to move and go through it. Let's get to the next piece. But I just know that's the wrong approach. Like, can you just dig into that concept a little bit of going slow?
I think the big thing, obviously, this Bow Works book focuses on trying to present a progressive way forward with teaching. It's there as a guide for teachers. It's by no means trying to tell teachers this is the gospel way of doing things. That's not my purpose. My purpose is to give them a book that won't harm them. Okay? For example, this kid in the Wild of Norfolk, which we're going to have to sort out, his mum is going to have to learn very quickly how to teach him, because logistically, we can't do anything apart from some Skype lessons, which I'm not a great fan of, because it's lose some physicality and expression feelings, within the communication, because it's all about communication. But actually, he is quite a good musician. His mother is a good musician, an amateur musician, of course, and not a string player. But I think she's an intelligent person she can support. But I need to provide lots of reinforcement material for each point that I'm trying to get across, for each step. For example, there's not much point in trying to introduce the left hand or string crossing if you can't hold the bow properly. Do one thing at a time. That's what I'm trying to do with this, is that your whole soul in terms of producing the sound that you individually make, because we all make individual sound. It's like what you hear. I mean, you can talk about that stuff at an artistry level as much as you like, but if you can't hold the bloody bow, it's impossible, And I just feel that I want to make sure that I leave something on this earth where I can really say I tried to make a difference with that, and give some progressive steps to enable people to find their inner voice quicker. It's what I do. I'm about trying to explain to young people, whether they're 5 or whether they're 22, it doesn't matter, how to improve. And you've got to get inside those early steps. It's kind of like a spiral. That's what I really liked with one of my teachers who was teaching like pedagogical stuff. She said, learning is like a spiral. You can talk on the highfalutin things, but if the basis of the spiral staircase is not stable, you've got nothing. And that's the kind of model that I'm trying to get along. So it's kind of challenging because it tries to explain everything in terms of rhythmic and pulse and so on. I don't know if you, in that thing I sent you, Jason, I just mentioned that one of the things that really got me going on this, it was almost by accident, as these things often are, because I was invited to go and have a meeting with the colour strings people in Finland. And this is two brothers who developed the colour strings method. They're Geza and Csaba Silvai. And Geza I know much better than Csaba. Geza was a violinist, Csaba was a cellist. And I always find it's kind of easy to talk to violinists, whereas cellists sometimes think the bass is kind of a big cello, and it's so not. This is what's one of my other big mantras. Again, cellists can get away with doing stuff early on because the string, immediately speaks, and you just you have to go and coach Grieg. What is it? That string piece where the bass goes dum da dum da dum da dum. I can't remember the name of the piece.
Holberg Suite, right?
Everybody's doing it so easily, and the bass players just can't do it, even at quite an advanced level. And it's like, why is that so easy for them and not for us? Well, okay, guess what? It's because of the thickness of the strings and the coordination and the getting the strings to vibrate and speak properly, on the bass. What happened was that I really, having designed this mind map, I wanted to go through each step logically. And it gets, seriously, the first page is about the movement that you need to draw the first bows, which is a down bow and an up bow. And that's it. That's basically what it's all about. We've got to learn how to make one movement and then the other movement. Then I had this real thing about why students found up bows so challenging and why it was. And it's purely because it's much more natural to push our arms away than to bring them in. And you've got to activate the string at the same time with exactly the same speed and weight. I don't use the pressure word, I use weight word. And just trying not to open up the bow too much, because if they haven't got an idea of pulse, how can they do 4 beats in the bar? It's all nonsense anyway. So it comes from that. And then trying to refine the movements into smaller versions of that. For example, if you're playing your eighth notes, in English we say the quavers for that, but I know I have to translate immediately. And how to use that movement effectively. But you can't get the movement quicker until you've done it at a comfortable movement speed for you. I mean, I can be talking about 7 or 8 year olds here, but I challenge any conservatoire student to go and do this stuff. I mean, of course, there's lots of material available, like Hal Robertson's stroking and so on. I like that very much also. But this is, before you do that, let's do this and get those real fundamentals there. The other thing that became obsessive was why string crossings was such a big deal. And I noticed the same repetitive behaviour with student after student. I mean, I've probably, without blowing my own trumpet, I've probably taught more younger students from start right through to professional level than most other people have. And had, I don't know, we have 30, for instance, in our junior department at the Royal College, and I teach some private students too whenever I can fit them in. So I've had, I don't know, hundreds of kids through my system, if you like. And they all seem to have the same issues about string crossings. And of course, I suddenly realised, oh my God, when I designed this book and sat down and tried to plan and go through the intellect of it, how many movements are there between 2 strings? Now, this is a bit geeky, but there are effectively 4 movements, but they're kind of palindromes of each other. And in the book, we've drawn diagrams of the movement of the arm, which drove my poor publisher, co-editor, absolutely insane. Of course, the other thing is he's a German bow player and I'm a French bow player. So we had to get rid of all those endless historic dinosaurial discussions as well before we got through this. And in the end, he completely has been supportive, and I've had to fight. And I mean, it's been really good because I get on so well with, this is Jan Alm, by the way, in Sweden. He plays in the Gothenburg Symphony Orchestra. I should give him a mention at this point. He is such a good friend of 20 years plus that I can take it from him that he might challenge me. I think I've won. I've won in round with these discussions about which is which way. I mean, even with Paul Ellison, he's been incredibly supportive. And in the first part of the book, I give credit to Paul and to Francois and to my daughter, actually, because she was, I think I've learned the most from teaching her. I taught her from age 5 to, she still plays for me occasionally now, but she's a busy young professional. And she taught me how to really understand that people didn't really listen to what you were saying, students. It's kind of like, she'd argue back with me, whereas most students want to please teacher, don't they? And she'd say, well, you didn't explain that properly. I'm thinking, oh, okay, I didn't. Let's try it another way. And then we'd fight and it was just very honest, the relationship. It was challenging. She was one of the hardest people to teach, but it was very useful. And she kind of grew up with this stuff, from a very early age, but it really got organised about 15 to 10 years ago. But the string crossing thing has become obsessive because what I decided I'd pilot teaching some kids in one specific way, using certain curves of the bow and the movements. Like, for example, the first curve I would recommend teaching is going from the G string to the D string. So you would effectively do G, G, D. So a down, up, and then a down bow on the D string. And actually, if you learn the up bow properly, and the up bow is the same length as the down bow, which even professional people find difficult sometimes in auditions, that's what people look for, equal down bows and up bows. But if you learn that from a very early stage, then the pivot, if you like, to go over to the D string, you cannot but do it right. Whereas if you, for example, do G, D, because your arm is moving against the track of the bow going back, if you understand me, then often students will introduce slurs unnecessarily. And I've checked this with a lot of violinists and cellists, and they do it as well. Kids do, it's as their coordination is developing, they often introduce unnecessary slurs or unintentional slurs. So I thought, well, I'm not having any of that. That was one other thing I designed with the first part of this book, was there is not one slur in the book. So I've concentrated on introducing all the curves that in between two strings, which is G and D. There are only 4, as I've said, but 2 of them, they kind of mirror each other. So it's like, for example, the first curve is G, G, D. The second one is the mirror of that, which is D, D, G. And quite by accident, when those pages come up, Jan said, Did you realise this is almost a palindrome, like a symmetrical page, 2 pages, apart from one where I threw in something that was a bit different, and they're completely symmetrical, which is really cool. And then the third and fourth curves are where the movement is going. They're bigger movements, basically. So D, 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 G, G. And the one that always caused the problem was the fourth curve. So basically what I've done is designed material that's progressive so that gets left until the coordination is developed. So it's a simpler way. If you go that slowly, the coordination develops quicker.
Caroline is a walking encyclopedia of techniques and tactics for inspiring and motivating students. I could feel that energy coming through the line as I was chatting with her, and I have so many takeaways from this next chunk of the episode. Before we finish up with this last part, I'd like to thank our last sponsor, which is the Bass Violin Shop. Located in North Carolina, they are the place to go for bassists in the Southeast. And they offer professional setups, repairs, and restorations at reasonable prices. They go beyond their customers' expectations with setups that are meticulous, they're friendly, they're helpful, they have highly skilled luthiers, and they've all got one common goal in mind, and that is making their customers happy with whatever bass they happen to play. So if you have an open seam, or you need a top-off restoration, those are the two extremes, right? They can take care of you. They're there to help you through the process. Check them out online at bassviolinshop.com. Okay, here we go with our final section of this wonderful chat with Caroline Emery.
I've done some beginner teaching, but it's definitely like by no means an expert, a little bit scared anytime I do one of those lessons and the bass comes out of the case for the first time and the bow comes out and I think, what? I think that first lesson is just like such a key moment, right? To like, am I going to hook them? Are they going to be into the bass? Are they going to buy in? Are the parents going to buy in? Like, what does that very first lesson look like for you?
Well, it depends on the student. And by the way, this book I do use with conservatoire students and high school students as well. So it's not designed totally to be the first thing. First lesson, I think they think I'm nuts. Actually, that's the first thing. The important thing is to create a relationship of trust. It's got to be very safe trust. We're into this child protection stuff in a big way over here. I'm all about making the child feel totally involved with their learning. So it's very conversational. It's fun. It plays into their, oh my God, what do you think that is then? And what are we going to do now? And this, all this sort of stuff. I mean, that's another way I've tried to design the book, in that there's plenty of space for each child to feel that this lesson for them is unique. So we end up drawing this, stuff that helps their imagery or whatever they want to do, or what that might remind them of. So, I mean, I'm quite a stickler about really being safe with the bass. So we have a way which we've actually designed with the kids about how we carry the instrument, how we unpack it. Usually I would try and find a stool to start off with, again, because it gets rid of that sort of awkward balance thing, and because they want to play. So, I mean, the simplest non-invasive and non-technically problematic way to progress is to get them to pluck the instrument. For example, I mean, I would try and use that to get the beat going. And obviously we'd be thinking of perhaps a clock, that might be something that a kid could grasp onto, that, you've got to make a steady beat. I might flick on some pop music for them and shock them that I know the latest thing or not. I mean, it's quite interesting. There's sort of, you think something's latest and then they think, oh, that went out last year, of course, yeah, and get them to do some basic musicianship, fun things, giving names to the bass. I love to personalize the instrument. So, I mean, one of the very first mini basses I had was called Benji, and he's still working strong. And we've got an Arthur and an Alexandra. We have a Calantha. We have all sorts of interesting names. And, getting them to know the names of the strings. Although, of course, when I teach the bow, I'm only going to be teaching the D string to start off with, according to this book, because that's the most equal side to bow. It's less problematic, So, I mean, it depends how long you've got and what sort of situation you're teaching in. But, I mean, I'm fortunate enough to be teaching mainly one-to-one lessons. So they would kind of be half an hour or something like that. Obviously, I keep on referring to this young man in Norfolk, because I'm just thinking, how am I going to help him? But he's going to have to get engaged with having quite a lot thrown at him. But again, you devise things according to the interest of the kid and the support of the parents. if you've got that. If you're in a school, it's going to be a different ball game. In a lot of my teaching, we've done small groups with young 7 and 8 year olds, so that can be kind of fun because you can play into the group aspect and get straight on into learning very, very early instrumental or ensemble skills. So I probably wouldn't use the bow in the first lesson. That comes out, I use the sort of magic wand Harry Potter sort of thing. We're going to get the magic wand out now. and actually treat it like another instrument. I really try to engage students to have reverence for the bow. Otherwise, you just become this left-hand junkie thing. I'm not a great fan of lots of pizzicato with the left hand early on because, the hand shapes. It's so important to get a really nice weighted hand. And it's kind of harder work to play pizzicato. Anybody knows a great jazz line, you've got to have a strong left hand to play that.
Just holding this thing, just getting that bow in their hands and getting comfortable with it. How does that work for you?
Okay, well, I think what I try to do is, as I say in the book, it gives you a guideline of saying your teacher needs to have time to craft your bow hold. Okay? So what I'm trying to do with that is putting the responsibility totally onto the teacher, which it has to be, especially with a young child. So what I'm doing often with a lot of mine is again, this is quite complicated to explain, and we should perhaps have a video thing going on here, but what is really important is to enable the child to understand first that their arm needs to be, you don't have to turn into a freak to play the bass, they need to be relaxed. Sometimes I have to ask permission, can I touch your arm? Because, we've got to be very careful about those things. And I might show them with my own movements that I'm relaxed like a puppet. I've got a big thing about making sure that the upper arm is as relaxed as possible. And particularly if you're playing French bow, you need to be able to rotate your upper arm to get the bow hole working. Because so often people think it's about holding it with the right hand and then you get the dirty sock approach where you have fingers squeezing and all this sort of stuff. So what I do is I literally show them how to hold the bow by me putting their fingers in the place. I would sit them down for this so that we don't get like standing on one leg and tension in the legs or something like that. Just sit them down. And I'm a great advocate for 1,000 bow holds. So what I mean by that is we start counting and we have scores on the music. So I would actually show them, I said, we're going to do 10 bow holds. And they count. These kids count. And so I would put their hand in the shape. And the big thing, particularly with French bow, I'm a natural French bow player. I do teach German bow. I don't have a problem with it. I love it. But generally I'm teaching more French bow beginners because that's what I've done and that's what we are in England. But it's by no means saying one's better than the other or anything. The whole shape of the hand, it's quite complicated, French bow, actually, because the placement of the thumb. So I'm very fussy about that. The thumb must be bent and not squeezed. And I tend to put it in the curve of where the bow has the curve, so in the old Italian type way of playing, rather than in the end of the black bit on the bow, if you know what I mean, where most of us place our bows. I tend to do that later because I find it rather too refined for a beginner, and they're more likely to squeeze. Plus, by that time, I would perhaps have a rubber on to help balance the bow hold. That's always very successful with more advanced students, and not least with the balance of the bow. So, and it's very almost meditational. If you engage parents to watch the lesson, it's very calm. By this point, I've spoken to the students. I actually really slow down my speaking while I'm doing it now. I can feel this is just how it is, and I want them to concentrate, be calm, and really listen to what I'm saying. And that has a huge spin-off to how they then respond in future lessons, actually. Because how many times do kids have an adult speaking to them calmly and slowly? And there is time and space for everything. It's not pressing buttons here and there and screaming and competing with things. And it's all about them. I think they get the idea that it's all about them. And I'm there totally for them. Sometimes now I have to be careful with my back getting older. But I'm often, in my first 25 years, I was on the floor with them. I don't do that so much now. It's very nurturing, and you just got to sort it out. And I don't let them put the bow on the string until they can do it themselves. So I will create the bow hold first, and then what I'll then do is get them to hold it in the left hand without touching the hair, horizontally to the floor, and then they place the bow hold with their right hand. And then when they're able to hold it by themselves, the first thing I do is put it vertically because there's no weight, so that they are learning. But generally, if they're holding it and supporting it with their left hand too, that dissolves, that goes away. I think I'm not a great one for all these bow games and shoot it up to the sky and all this sort of stuff that the Suzuki people do. I find that's just confusing. Let's just learn to hold the damn thing. And then, when they've done, maybe I might do 2 or 3 lessons just learning how to hold the bow. Not just that in half an hour. You maybe have 2 sessions of that within the half an hour. And then you do some pizzicato work, some clapping work, some pitch work. Have fun. It's very important to have fun. And actually, even with older students who, like, for example, if they've come to conservatoire and they haven't been taught particularly, I can think of one student I've taught recently who came in quite weak and has just come out in the 3rd year for junior recital with a really nice mark. I'm really thrilled by that because his growth has been huge. But I need to deal with all of that stuff with him because he didn't know how to hold the bow in a way that was going to function for him and without tension. Plus, I stood him up and did all sorts of things, stood him on his head, pulled him apart, and did everything. So it's obviously at that age you can move very fast. And the teenagers, they love it. They love this sort of work, going again and perhaps standing up for the first time because it kind of buys into their processing that they're doing in that age group. That they're starting to work things out for themselves a lot more. There's a big difference between when you're responsible for their learning and their physicality, and then when they become a teenager, they can start taking over decisions, and it's more conscious learning.
When you start to have people stand, or when they start to stand, why might one want to stand? I guess, what does it do for them in terms of the bow or just their approach to the bass? Because I sat for years and years and I couldn't stand. I'd stand and I'd play like a 4th grader, right? And then finally I just said, this is silly. And I worked consciously on standing, and it opened up my playing in so many interesting ways. What are some of the reasons why one might start to explore standing?
Okay, well, you asked me what I was doing in between the bringing out the 2nd volume and this. There's a 20-year gap apart from raising a daughter. I actually met Francois and went for some lessons with him, and bought a bass, started standing up thinking, okay, I'm supposed to be teaching the bass. I should know how to do this. Why not? And that was amazing because it actually got rid of a lot of early, if you like, ingrained bad physical things for me and helped me develop. And then I started to do quite a lot of professional playing again. You automatically, everybody, particularly if they're female, takes a break when they've got young kids and you're building up your teaching or whatever. And I did a lot of playing in Scandinavian countries, actually, when my daughter was about 8, 9, 10 and upwards and so on. So I was interested from a very selfish point of view as well, because I wanted to get into this, and not only for myself but to then be able to teach better. So from my point of view, it got rid of a lot of issues about, I'm a person who's quite tall, but I don't have very long legs. I don't have very long arms. And this sort of way of playing really helped me solve any difficulties that I was having for myself. Plus, what I found with the teaching is that actually, if you get a serious student, obviously at the Menuhin school, I needed to be achieving highly with my students because they're in the environment of some of the top string players in the world, and they've got to play. And you're not going to stand up on the platform and not play in tune or well, and you've got to justify the instrument as a solo instrument. So, of course, that means playing quite high and mastering all the thumb position with ease. And the angled end pin I just found I could just do that with the students. The students' progress was faster. They could be more picky about their own hygiene in terms of intonation and posture and all these sort of things. And the progress was huge, much faster. That's not to say they never sat down. In fact, I think the angled end pin actually is very similar to sitting down in that you can use your upper body very, very much. I'm not a great one for the straight end pin, I have to be honest, because there's so much more weight on the left hand. And the whole point was to get rid of as many physicality problems or issues. That's why I went down that track. And a lot of people were doing it, in the same way, particularly with my trips to the States. And the end pin is not something weird. I mean, I'm probably the only person doing it in England, since I'm, again, thought of that as that weird woman that teaches, But it reinforces that. But I don't care. I've just had 2 students win first and second prize in a string competition where they had to play concerto. And I had a 16-year-old played Tubin concerto and a 17-year-old played 9 variants. And they smashed the violinists who were playing, Sibelius and God knows what. And, people came up and said, what are those basses they play? And even one bass player said, what is that? There's such a clear sound as though it's something to do with the instrument. Yeah, but it's perhaps something to do with the way they're playing and able to get around the instrument. I just think the whole idea is to give as many skills as possible to young players. That's what I'm about, really. So I feel it's kind of easier for me to do that. I'm not saying that it's not easy for other people to do it a different way, but you can really use the ergonomics of your body, weight and so on to do that. Plus, it's all about vibrations and learning how to use the resonance to help intonation and the feel of the instrument to get the students to play better in tune and with a more projected musical idea.
What are maybe some exercises or just some things that you encourage students to focus on in terms of the bow as they get more advanced?
I think most of my advanced young players, everybody finds what works for them. Obviously, there's a few things. I mean, I'm not going to say you must do this in your practice. However, you tend to get a lot of principles that get, I mean, if I've been teaching them since they were 8 or even 12, or a lot might come at 13, 14 sort of thing. The early things that I tend to do of waking up with the sound, waking the instrument up, waking your body up, just getting some open strings going, talking about the bow changes. I think that's really fundamental, so that you're, drawing the bow. I like this idea of doing it, not the full bow to start off with, just feeling very comfortable. You can start from the heel to the middle, or you can start, around the middle if you want, that's what you're working on at that point. But really making sure that the bow changes are beautiful. We don't want this. I always refer to the old-fashioned radio dial, when it's when you change the bow and it just sounds like some disgusting thing. I love the agricultural noises reference as well. No agricultural noises, please. That sort of thing. And toilet noises version 2. Thank you. The younger kids love that. But the idea of kind of like having a continuous conveyor belt, so that it should be feeling completely continuous, so that you can't tell the difference between a down bow and up bow. And how that feels is going to be very individual to each student. I then, of course, having spent the whole of this book not doing slurs, I might engage them to do some string crossings on the slur so that they can feel the strings and feel how small the movements can be. So not just the slurs, but also separate bows as well, to see that you can continue the sort of flow of the conveyor belt even though you're crossing the strings. Then I love to have the fundamental sounds. I'm obsessed with, for example, if you play the low G and you get the high G, the open string vibrating, all those resonant things, all the physics of the instrument. If you play a B flat, you can hear a D. If you squeeze the string, you're not going to get that. So making sure that they wake up the instrument as well and everything's vibrating. If you play an open D, you'll hear the top D. And when you're playing the harmonic D, for example, if you're working in thumb position, that's often a lovely place to start because everything works beautifully with both hands. You've got the two hands together. I mean, I've got a lot of sleepy teenagers at that, early in the morning. The Menuhin school is a residential school, and sometimes quite often I teach at 8:30 in the morning. And the school has made it even worse by insisting I try and teach at 8 because they want to have them in some sort of ghastly meeting at 9 o'clock. So the poor guy on the Monday morning was this 16-year-old, just to get him conscious and standing up, thinking, was kind of like I had to do my tap dance routine to sort of make that happen. But those things are really important, and anybody who has an early morning lesson, they learn that and they get their instrument working properly as well. Scales, of course. The first hour should be scales of, many different types, different bowings, different articulations. I tend to, you can't do everything, but I tend to say, look, I think we need to obsess a bit about this because it might come up in a piece or something. So I tend to be quite specific about, one thing that they would do in the warm-up. Like, for example, if there's they've got to have unisons or a double stop or something, then perhaps they should do a little bit of that as well. Balancing the chords, that's nice. Always nice, particularly in thumb position, because as long as you don't press, and that's really nice to do in a warm-up. So just very, very relaxed without having to worry about projection or these sort of things. Getting the thing in tune, making sure you're in tune, you're listening properly.
Caroline, thank you so much for being on the show. I can't begin to express how much it means to me to have you on here. And my apologies. I've been doing this at every show at this point, so I'm not going to give this apology every time. But why didn't I have you on earlier? What is wrong with me not contacting you earlier? And with somebody like Caroline working in this double bass world like she has for all these decades and innovating, there's no way we could even begin to scratch the surface on what we could talk about. So I even said that up front. I said, Caroline, let's talk about bow works. Let's dig into that, see where it takes us, and let's do a round 2 and let's do a round 3. And there's so much that we could cover, whether it's one-on-one like we did now or a panel discussion or maybe something at a live event. I'm sure that we will be having her on again very soon. And if you have any ideas for another episode with Caroline or any episode in general, let me know. You can reach out to me. feedback@contrabassconversations.com goes to our team here, our small but plucky team. Right now, me and Trevor Jones. But it would be great to hear from you about anything. Are you enjoying these shows? Let me know. It means so much to me. I read every message I get. I answer every message I get. And I love getting emails from you. You can also reach out on social media, of course. Links to all that are on our website, contrabassconversations.com. And speaking of that website, if you want to help out the show, The best thing you can do, the only thing I'm asking right now is share this episode. Find somebody in your life and share it with them. It could be a student. It could be a colleague. It could be your old bass teacher. Who knows? Share this with them. I know there's somebody out there that would love to hear what Caroline and I were talking about today. She would appreciate it. I would appreciate it. It would mean so much to me. Thank you so much for hanging out for another episode of Contrabass Conversations, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.